At my company's promotion ceremony, my wife's dad, the boss, cornered me with papers to sign over my tech patents to his 17-year-old son. He needs a future more than you, my wife's dad said, ripping my promotion letter. When the $50 million acquisition offer arrived the next morning, man, I should have known something was off when I caught my reflection in the elevator mirror that morning. There I was, straightening my lucky navy tie for the third time, wearing the charcoal suit I'd splurged on last Christmas, the one that made me feel like I could conquer the world. 5 years. 5 damn years of grinding at Draytech Industries, pulling all-nighters in that cramped cubicle, surviving on energy drinks and pure determination. Today was supposed to be my day. Director of Innovation. The promotion I'd been busting my ass for since I walked through those glass doors as a junior developer. The AI-powered logistics algorithm I'd built wasn't just some basic code. It was a game changer. We're talking about a system that could predict supply chain bottlenecks 3 weeks out, optimize delivery routes in real time, and cut operational costs by 30%. I'd watched our quarterly reports go from red to black because of my work. Hell, I'd practically saved the company's logistics division single-handedly. Everyone knew it, too. Jake from IT kept slapping my back all morning, saying stuff like, about time they recognized the real talent around here. Even Martha from accounting, who never talked to anyone below management level, gave me a thumbs up and said she was proud of me. But Sierra, my wife of 3 years, was acting weird as hell. Usually, she'd be the first one celebrating, planning some fancy dinner, or at least cracking a smile. Instead, she kept checking her phone every 2 minutes and giving me these tight-lipped smiles that didn't reach her eyes. When I asked if she was okay, she just brushed it off with some excuse about being tired from work. Red flag number 1, but I was too pumped up on adrenaline and coffee to really process it. Her father, Gerald Barrett, the big man himself, CEO and founder of Draytech, was another story entirely. Usually, the guy was all handshakes and attaboy energy whenever he saw me around the office. Today, though, he barely looked me in the eye during the announcement. Just a quick nod and a congratulations, son, before disappearing back into his corner office. For a man who built his empire on being larger than life, he seemed surprisingly small today. The after-party was supposed to be the cherry on top. Nothing fancy, just cake in the break room and some champagne the HR department had picked up from Costco. But hey, I wasn't complaining. I was finally getting the respect I deserved, the title that matched my contributions, and a salary bump that would let Sierra and me start thinking seriously about that house we'd been eyeing in the suburbs. That's when Gerald appeared at my elbow like some kind of corporate ghost. "Adrian," he said, his voice carrying that particular tone that made everyone in a 50-foot radius suddenly find somewhere else to be. "Got a minute? Let's chat in my office." I should have trusted my gut right then. The way he said it, casual but not really casual, friendly but with an edge that could cut glass. But I was still riding high on my promotion buzz, so I followed him through the maze of cubicles and into that intimidating mahogany-paneled office of his. The place screamed old money and power plays, with its leather-bound books that probably cost more than my monthly salary and those stupid golf trophies lined up like tiny golden soldiers. Gerald didn't waste time with small talk. He walked around to his side of the massive oak desk and slid a manila folder across the polished surface toward me. The thing looked innocuous enough, but something about the way he handled it, like it contained nuclear launch codes or something, made my stomach drop. "Sign the transfer, Adrian," he said, and damn if his voice wasn't cooler than a January morning in Minnesota. No emotion whatsoever, just pure business. "Your algorithm belongs to the company now, and my son Jace needs something to build his future on." I stared down at that folder like it might bite me. My hands felt numb as I opened it and saw what was inside. Patent transfer agreement. Legal jargon that basically boiled down to one simple, soul-crushing fact. They wanted me to sign over complete ownership of my life's work. Not just licensing rights or revenue sharing. Complete ownership. My algorithm, my innovation, my 5 years of blood, sweat, and caffeine-fueled genius would belong to Jace Barrett. Gerald's 25-year-old son, who couldn't code his way out of a paper bag if his life depended on it. I must have hesitated too long, because Gerald's expression shifted from neutral to something a lot less pleasant. Without breaking eye contact, he reached into his desk drawer and pulled out the promotion letter, My promotion letter, the one that was supposed to change everything. Then, methodically, like he was conducting some twisted business ritual, he tore it in half. Then in half again. The sound of ripping paper echoed in that office like gunshots. "You'll get nothing unless you give Jace what he needs to succeed," he said, his voice still calm as death. Too calm. The kind of calm that comes right before a tornado hits. Nothing at all. I looked toward the office door, desperately hoping Sierra would walk in and tell me this was all some kind of sick joke. Instead, I saw her standing there in the doorway, and the expression on her face told me everything I needed to know. She'd known. She'd known this was coming, and she hadn't said a word. My own wife, the person who was supposed to have my back no matter what, had watched me get dressed in my best suit this morning, watched me practice my acceptance speech in the bathroom mirror, and said absolutely nothing. The silence in that office was deafening. Gerald stood there with pieces of my future scattered across his desk, waiting for my answer. Sierra lingered in the doorway like she wanted to disappear into the carpet. And me? I sat there feeling like the biggest fool in the history of corporate America, finally understanding that this celebration was never about celebrating me at all. The drive home felt like the longest 23 minutes of my life. Sierra sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window like the suburban houses we passed were the most fascinating things she'd ever seen. I kept waiting for her to say something. Anything, to explain what the hell had just happened back there. But the silence stretched between us like a chasm, filled only by the hum of the engine and the occasional click of the turn signal. I'd always been the type to fill awkward silences with jokes or random observations, but right now I couldn't find a single word that didn't feel loaded with accusation. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles had gone white, and I could feel this weird tension building in my jaw from clenching my teeth. Every red light felt like torture, giving me more time to replay that scene in Gerald's office over and over again. The way Sierra had just stood there, watching her father tear up my promotion letter like it was yesterday's newspaper. When we finally pulled into our driveway, the driveway of the little starter home we'd bought with dreams of upgrading once my career took off, I couldn't take it anymore. I turned off the engine and just sat there for a moment, gathering the courage to ask the question that was eating me alive. "Did you know?" I asked, my voice coming out rougher than I'd intended. "About what your dad was planning to do?" Sierra's shoulders sagged, and she finally turned to look at me. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but I couldn't tell if it was from guilt or just stress. She took a shaky breath and nodded. "Yeah," she whispered. I knew. Those two words hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd been hoping, praying, really, that she'd been just as blindsided as I was. That maybe Gerald had gone rogue, and she was as horrified as I felt. But no, my own wife had been in on it from the beginning. "How long?" I managed to ask, though I wasn't sure I really wanted to know the answer. "About a week," she said, and then the floodgates opened. "Adrian, you have to understand. Jace is really struggling right now. He's failing half his classes at Stanford, and Dad's been freaking out about what's going to happen when he graduates. He needs something solid to build his future on, something that'll give him credibility in the tech world." I stared at her like she'd just spoken to me in ancient Greek. "So you thought it was okay to steal my life's work because your brother can't handle college?" "It's not stealing," she shot back, her voice getting defensive in that way that told me she'd been rehearsing this conversation. "You already have talent. You'll make something else. You always do. You're brilliant, Adrian. You could create 10 more algorithms just as good as this one." The casual way she dismissed 5 years of my life, like my work was just some disposable commodity that could be replaced with a snap of my fingers, made my blood boil. "Are you seriously sitting there telling me that because I'm capable of innovation, it's okay for your family to just take whatever I create?" "That's not what I'm saying," she protested, but her voice lacked conviction. "Look, we're family. Families help each other out. Jace needs this more than you do right now." Family. The word tasted bitter in my mouth. What about your family helping me out? What about supporting your husband's career instead of sabotaging it? Sierra's face crumpled, and for a moment I almost felt bad for pushing so hard. "Almost. I thought you'd understand," she said. "I thought you'd want to help Jace succeed." That's when it really hit me. The fundamental disconnect between how she saw this situation and how I did. To her, this was just family business, some kind of internal resource allocation where my work could be shuffled around like poker chips. She genuinely couldn't understand why I was so upset about being asked to hand over my intellectual property to her underachieving brother. I got out of the car without another word and headed straight for the bedroom. Sierra followed me, asking what I was doing, but I ignored her as I pulled my old duffel bag out of the closet and started throwing clothes into it. T-shirts, jeans, my lucky Stanford hoodie from college, the essentials. "Where are you going?" she asked, panic creeping into her voice now that she realized I wasn't just going to roll over and accept this. "I need space to think," I said, zipping up the bag. "I can't be here right now." I grabbed my laptop, my charger, and the framed photo of my grandmother that I kept on my nightstand, the only family photo I really cared about anymore. Sierra kept trying to talk to me as I moved around the house, but it was like listening to someone speak underwater. All I could think about was getting out of there before I said something I couldn't take back. 20 minutes later, I was standing on Mateo's doorstep, feeling like a refugee from my own life. Mateo Santos had been my roommate at Stanford, back when we were both broke computer science majors living on ramen and ambition. Now he was pulling down six figures as a cybersecurity consultant, but he still lived in the same modest apartment near downtown, claiming he liked the character of the old building. He took one look at my face and the duffel bag slung over my shoulder and stepped aside without asking a single question. That's the thing about real friends. They know when you need space to process and when you need someone to just hand you a beer and let you exist without explanation. "Rough day at the office?" he asked, grabbing 2 Coronas from his fridge and tossing me one. I caught the bottle and twisted off the cap, taking a long pull before answering. "You could say that." We sat on his beat-up leather couch, the same one we'd rescued from a garage sale our junior year, and I told him everything. The promotion that wasn't really a promotion, Gerald's ultimatum, Sierra's betrayal, the whole twisted family plan to steal my work and hand it over to Jace like some kind of participation trophy. Mateo listened without interrupting, occasionally shaking his head or muttering curses in Spanish under his breath. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, just staring at his beer bottle. "What's your next move?" he finally asked, and something about the way he said it told me he already knew I had one. I did have one. I'd been thinking about it during that entire silent car ride home, turning it over in my mind like a puzzle piece I was trying to fit into place. It was risky as hell, but it might be the only way to take back control of my life. "I'm going to call Redsky," I said. The funny thing about life-changing moments is that they usually happen when you're sitting in your underwear eating leftover pizza at 11:30 at night. That's exactly where I was, sprawled across Mateo's couch in my boxers and an old MIT t-shirt, nursing my third beer and trying to wrap my head around the nuclear fallout that had become my existence. Mateo had crashed around 10, but sleep was the furthest thing from my mind. My brain was running at full throttle, cycling through anger, betrayal, and something that felt dangerously close to panic. I kept thinking about that smug look on Gerald's face when he tore up my promotion letter. The way Sierra had just stood there like some kind of accomplice. And Jace, God, don't even get me started on Jace. The kid who'd never written a line of code that actually compiled, who'd probably never worked a real day in his life, was supposed to inherit my life's work because Daddy thought he needed a head start. That's when my phone buzzed on the coffee table. The screen lit up with a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was familiar, Silicon Valley. For a split second, I considered letting it go to voicemail. I wasn't exactly in the mood for whatever telemarketer or recruiter was calling at this ungodly hour, but something made me swipe to answer. "Adrian Clark," I said, trying to sound more professional than I felt. "Mr. Clark, I hope I'm not calling too late. This is Amira Bennett from Redsky Systems." I nearly choked on my beer. Redsky Systems, one of the biggest tech companies on the West Coast, the kind of operation that made Dratech look like a corner store. I'd heard of Amira Bennett too. She was their lead strategist, the woman who'd orchestrated some of the most successful tech acquisitions of the past decade. What the hell was she doing calling me at 11:30 on a Tuesday night? "Ms. Bennett," I managed, sitting up straighter despite the fact that she couldn't see me. "No, not too late at all. What can I do for you?" "I'll cut right to the chase," she said, and I could hear the confidence in her voice, the kind that comes from knowing you hold all the cards. "We've been following your work at Dratech Industries. Your AI-powered logistics algorithm specifically. Word travels fast in our industry, and what we've heard is impressive. My heart started pounding so hard I was sure she could hear it through the phone. Redsky had been watching my work? How was that even possible? Draytech had been pretty tight-lipped about the algorithm, treating it like some kind of trade secret. I'm flattered, I said, which was the understatement of the century. But I'm not sure I understand. How exactly did you hear about my algorithm? Amira laughed, and it was the kind of laugh that said she knew way more than she was letting on. Mr. Clark, good innovation doesn't happen in a vacuum. We keep tabs on breakthrough technologies across the industry. Your logistics system caught our attention about 3 months ago when Draytech's quarterly reports started showing some very interesting efficiency improvements. 3 months ago, that was right around the time my algorithm had gone fully operational and started showing real results. I'd been so focused on proving its value to Gerald and the board that I'd never considered other companies might be paying attention. We've done our homework, she continued. We know the system is your brainchild, developed primarily on your own time with minimal company resources. We also know you're not getting the recognition you deserve. The way she said that last part made me wonder just how much research Redsky had actually done. Did they know about today's disaster? About Gerald's ultimatum and the patent transfer sitting and signed on his desk? What exactly are you proposing? I asked, though part of me was afraid to hope. A full acquisition, she said without hesitation. We want to buy your AI system outright. Complete ownership transfer, with you staying on as project head to continue development under the Redsky umbrella. I felt like I'd been hit by lightning. What kind of numbers are we talking about? There was a pause, and I could practically hear her smiling through the phone. $50 million, Mr. Clark. Up front, with additional performance bonuses based on implementation success. Plus a guaranteed 3-year contract as department head with full creative control over your project. $50 million. I had to grip the phone tighter to keep from dropping it. That was more money than I'd ever dreamed of seeing in my lifetime. More than enough to tell Gerald Barrett exactly what he could do with his patent transfer. More than enough to start over completely. Of course, Amira continued, we need to move quickly. The market window for this type of innovation is narrow, and we have competitors who would love to get their hands on something like this. How quickly? I asked, my voice coming out steadier than I felt. Could you be in our Palo Alto offices tomorrow morning? Say 10 a.m. Tomorrow morning. Less than 12 hours from now. I looked around Mateo's apartment, at my duffel bag sitting by the door, at the empty beer bottles on the coffee table, at the ruins of my old life scattered around me like debris from a plane crash. I'll be there, I said. Excellent. I'll email you the preliminary terms tonight, so you can review them. Mr. Clark, her voice took on a more serious tone. I want you to know that Redsky values innovation and the people who create it. We believe in rewarding talent, not exploiting it. After we hung up, I sat there on Mateo's couch staring at my phone like it might disappear if I looked away. $50 million. Department head. Creative control. Everything Gerald had tried to take away from me was being offered by someone else. Someone who actually understood the value of what I created. I grabbed my laptop and started doing research on Redsky's recent acquisitions, their corporate culture, their track record with independent developers. Everything I found looked solid. They had a reputation for treating their acquired talent well, for investing in long-term development rather than just strip mining intellectual property. Around 2 a.m., Amira's email arrived with the preliminary terms. I read through every word twice, checking for catches or fine print that might bite me later. But it all looked legitimate. More than legitimate. It looked like a chance to turn the worst day of my professional life into the best. I closed the laptop and leaned back against the couch cushions, finally feeling something I hadn't felt since walking into Gerald's office that morning. Hope. Maybe Sierra Wa. I wasn't going to hand over my life's work to make Jace Barrett look good. I was going to sell it to someone who actually deserved it and make Gerald realize exactly what he'd lost in the process. I didn't sleep that night. Not even close. Instead, I sat at Mateo's kitchen table with my laptop open, a pot of coffee brewing its third round, and a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years burning through my veins like rocket fuel. The preliminary contract from Redsky was pulled up on one browser tab, while I had Gmail open in another, drafting what would either be the most liberating email of my career or the most catastrophic. Probably both. The cursor blinked at me from the empty message field, waiting for me to find the right words to blow up my entire professional world. I'd written and deleted the opening line about 15 times. Dear Gerald felt too formal. Hey asshole felt too honest. To whom it may concern felt like I was filing a complaint with customer service. Finally, I settled on something that felt appropriately professional, yet unmistakably final. Effective immediately, I am resigning from my position at Draytech Industries. I typed, and damn if those words didn't feel like the most honest thing I'd written in years. My fingers were actually shaking as I continued, but it was the good kind of shaking, like a guitarist right before stepping on stage at Madison Square Garden. I kept the resignation letter itself pretty straightforward. No need to air all the dirty laundry in the official document. I covered the basics. My last day would be today. I'd completed all outstanding project deliverables, and I wished the company continued success. Standard corporate farewell stuff that wouldn't give their legal team any ammunition if things got messy later. But then came the real kicker, the attachment that was going to change everything. I'd spent the past 3 hours putting together something I was calling Project Genesis. A complete development history. It was a comprehensive video presentation that walked through every single stage of my algorithm's creation, complete with time-stamped screen recordings, original code commits, and documentation that proved beyond any shadow of a doubt that this innovation belonged to me and me alone. The video started with footage from my home office 2 years ago, when I was still working on the initial concept during my own time, using my own equipment. I'd filmed myself explaining the core logic structure, sketching out flowcharts on my personal whiteboard, testing early prototypes on datasets I'd assembled myself. All of it was clearly dated, all of it was obviously independent work, and all of it predated any official Draytech involvement by months. Then I walked through the development timeline, showing how I'd brought the concept to work only after I'd already solved the fundamental technical challenges. How I'd used my own laptop for the majority of the coding. How I'd purchased my own cloud computing resources to run the initial tests. The company had provided office space and a salary, sure, but the intellectual property was mine from the ground up. The best part, or maybe the most devastating part, depending on your perspective, was the section where I demonstrated Jace's actual technical contributions to the project. Spoiler alert, there weren't any. I had email threads showing him asking me to explain basic programming concepts. I had code review sessions where he'd suggested changes that would have fundamentally broken the system. I even had a recording from 6 months ago where he'd admitted in a team meeting that he didn't really understand the math behind the algorithm, but thought it seemed pretty cool. This wasn't just about protecting my intellectual property anymore. This was about setting the record straight and making sure everyone knew exactly who had created what. Gerald wanted to hand my life's work over to his son? Fine. But first, the entire tech community was going to know the truth about what Jace Barrett was actually capable of producing on his own. I attached the video file to my resignation email and started crafting the distribution list. Gerald Barrett, obviously. The entire board of directors. Every department head. All of my former colleagues in the engineering division. HR, legal, accounting, basically everyone who had a Draytech email address was going to see this. But I didn't stop there. I also sent copies to TechCrunch, Wired, Ars Technica, and half a dozen other industry publications. If Gerald wanted to play hardball with my career, he was going to discover that two could play that game. The difference was that I actually had the truth on my side. The subject line took me another 20 minutes to perfect, setting the record straight. The true story behind Draytech's AI innovation. Direct, professional, and just dramatic enough to ensure people would actually open it. I hovered my cursor over the send button for a solid 5 minutes, knowing that once I clicked it, there was no going back. This wasn't just burning bridges. This was napalming the entire landscape and salting the earth behind me. After today, I'd never work at another traditional corporation. My name would be associated with this scandal forever. Future employers would know I was the guy who publicly embarrassed his former CEO and exposed his nepotistic schemes to the entire industry. But you know what? I was okay with that. Better to be known as the whistleblower who stood up for his principles than the pushover who let his in-laws steal his life's work. At 6:47 a.m., I clicked send. The email whooshed out into the digital universe, carrying with it 5 years of suppressed frustration, righteous anger, and a complete documentation of Gerald Barrett's attempt to commit intellectual property theft. Within minutes, My phone started buzzing with delivery confirmations, auto-replies, and the first few shocked responses from colleagues who were checking their email before their morning coffee. I closed the laptop, stretched my arms above my head, and actually smiled for the first time in 24 hours. For the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe again, like I'd finally stopped holding my breath underwater and broken through to the surface. Mateo stumbled into the kitchen around 7, wearing nothing but boxers and bedhead, probably wondering why his apartment smelled like a Starbucks. He took one look at my face and started grinning. "You did it, didn't you?" he said, pouring himself a cup of my leftover coffee. "You actually did it." I nodded, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders that I hadn't even realized was there. "Yeah, man, I did it." And for the first time in years, I slept like a man who knew exactly what his work was worth. I woke up at 8:15 a.m. feeling like I'd been hit by a freight train, but it was the good kind of exhaustion, the kind that comes after you've finally done something that scared the hell out of you. My phone was buzzing like an angry hornet on Mateo's coffee table, lighting up with notifications every few seconds. Missed calls, text messages, emails, LinkedIn alerts. The digital equivalent of chaos, and I was the guy who'd thrown the first punch. Mateo was already up, standing in his kitchen wearing a button-down shirt and slacks, which was weird because he usually worked from home in whatever he'd slept in. He was stirring scrambled eggs and grinning like he'd just won the lottery. "Dude, you're famous," he said, waving his phone at me. "Check this out. TechCrunch already picked up your story. The headline is Draytech Employee Exposes Corporate IP Theft in Explosive Resignation Video." I grabbed my phone and scrolled through the notifications. Holy shit. The story had already been shared over 3,000 times on social media. The comments section was going absolutely insane, with people calling Gerald everything from a corporate parasite to much more colorful descriptions I couldn't repeat in polite company. Industry insiders were chiming in with their own horror stories about nepotism and intellectual property theft. My inbox had exploded overnight with interview requests, job offers, and messages of support from developers I'd never even met. But the best part? The absolute cherry on top? Gerald's personal phone number was blowing up too, judging by the increasingly frantic voicemails he'd left me between 5 a.m. and 7 a.m. Each one got progressively more desperate, starting with, "Adrian, we need to talk about this misunderstanding," and escalating to, "You have no idea what you've done to this company." I deleted every single one without listening to the full messages. "I need to get to Palo Alto," I told Mateo, checking the time. "Meeting with Redsky in less than 2 hours. Want me to drive you to the airport?" he offered, but I was already pulling up Uber on my phone. No time for goodbyes or second-guessing. This was happening whether I felt ready or not. The flight to San Francisco was surreal. I spent most of it staring out the window, watching the country scroll by beneath me while my phone continued its relentless buzzing. By the time we landed, my resignation video had been viewed over 50,000 times, and 3 more tech publications had picked up the story. I was trending on Twitter under #DrayTechScandal, which felt both terrifying and vindicating at the same time. Redsky's headquarters in Palo Alto looked like something out of a sci-fi movie. All glass and steel and clean lines that screamed, "We have more money than God, and we're not afraid to show it." The lobby alone probably cost more than most people's houses, with these massive digital displays showing off their latest innovations and a reception desk that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of marble. Amira Bennett met me in the lobby at exactly 10 a.m., and she was everything I'd imagined from our phone conversation. Sharp, confident, wearing a tailored suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She had this energy about her that made you feel like you were in the presence of someone who could move mountains if she felt like it. "Mr. Clark," she said, extending her hand with a smile that could have powered a small city. "I have to say, you certainly know how to make an entrance. My phone's been ringing all morning with people asking about our interest in your algorithm." We took an elevator to the 32nd floor, where Redsky's acquisition team had set up shop in a conference room that overlooked the entire Silicon Valley. The view was incredible. You could see for miles in every direction, all the way to the bay. It felt symbolic somehow, like I was looking down at my old life from a completely different altitude. The contract negotiation moved faster than I'd expected. Amira walked me through the final terms, which were even better than what she'd outlined over the phone. $50 million upfront, yes, but also equity options that could be worth millions more if the algorithm performed as well as they expected. Full creative control over my project, a team of 12 engineers to help with implementation, and a corner office that came with its own espresso machine. One thing I want to be absolutely clear about, Amira said as we reviewed the final paperwork. This acquisition is contingent on you having clear, uncontested ownership of the intellectual property. Based on the documentation you provided last night, we're confident that won't be an issue, but I needed to state it explicitly. I signed my name on the dotted line at 11:47 a.m. Pacific Time, officially becoming the richest person I'd ever known personally. The pen felt heavy in my hand, like it was made of gold instead of plastic. Amira shook my hand again and said something about how excited they were to have me on the team, but honestly, I was still processing the fact that I'd just signed a $50 million contract. The press announcement goes live at noon, she told me as we walked back toward the elevator. We've already got statements prepared for the major tech outlets. Redsky acquires independent AI startup for $50 million is going to be the headline. Independent AI startup. I like the sound of that a hell of a lot better than disgruntled former employee. By 12:15, my phone had completely lost its mind. The press release had hit every major tech blog simultaneously, and the story was spreading like wildfire. My LinkedIn profile was getting so many views it crashed twice. Industry analysts were calling it one of the most significant AI acquisitions of the year. My bank account was showing a balance that made me dizzy just looking at it. I turned off my phone after the 50th missed call from Sierra, then Gerald, then Jace. I didn't need to hear whatever desperate nonsense they were peddling now. The damage was done, the contracts were signed, and for the first time in my adult life, I was completely, totally, financially independent. Standing in that Redsky lobby, looking out at the California sunshine and thinking about the shitstorm I'd left behind in my wake, I couldn't help but smile. Gerald Barrett had tried to erase me, but instead he'd just made me rich. The first person I wanted to tell about the Redsky deal wasn't Sierra, wasn't Mateo, and sure as hell wasn't Gerald Barrett. It was my grandmother, Miriam Clark, the woman who'd raised me after my parents died in that car crash when I was 8. The woman who'd scraped together enough money from her Social Security checks to buy me my first computer when I was 13, even though she could barely afford groceries that month. If anyone deserved to hear about my success straight from my mouth, it was her. I caught the first flight back to Denver the next morning, my head still spinning from everything that had happened in the past 48 hours. The plane was half empty, which gave me plenty of space to spread out and try to process the fact that I was now worth more money than I'd ever dreamed of having. Every few minutes, I'd pull out my phone just to look at my bank balance again, making sure those zeros were really there and this wasn't all some elaborate fever dream. Grandma Miriam still lived in the same little house in Lakewood where she'd raised me, a modest 2-bedroom place with vinyl siding and a front porch that sagged slightly on the left side. The neighborhood had seen better days, but she refused to move. "This house has good bones," she always said, "and it's got all the memories." I used to think that was just stubborn old lady talk, but now I understood what she meant. Some places hold pieces of your soul, and you can't just pack those up and take them with you. I found her in the backyard, wearing her favorite purple cardigan and tending to the tomato plants she'd been babying since spring. At 78, she moved a little slower than she used to, but her mind was sharp as ever. She looked up when she heard the gate creak, and her whole face lit up with that smile that could make everything feel okay, no matter how badly you'd screwed up. "Adrian Michael Clark," she said, pulling off her gardening gloves and walking over to give me one of those hugs that somehow managed to squeeze out all the stress and anxiety I'd been carrying around. "What are you doing here in the middle of the week? Shouldn't you be at work making those computer things do whatever it is they do?" I laughed despite everything. Grandma Miriam had never quite grasped what I did for a living beyond something with computers, but she'd always been proud of me anyway. She had this way of cutting through all the technical jargon and corporate BS to focus on what really mattered, whether I was happy and whether I was being treated right. "Actually, Grandma, I quit my job yesterday," I said, and her eyebrows shot up so fast I thought they might disappear into her hairline. "You quit? Adrian, honey, what happened? Did they not appreciate you? Because if some boss was giving you trouble, I'll march down there myself and give them a piece of my mind." The mental image of my 78-year-old grandmother storming into Gerald Barrett's office to defend my honor was both hilarious and oddly comforting. I could actually picture her doing it, too. She'd raised me to stand up for myself and never let anyone treat me like I was worth less than I was. It's a long story, I said, leading her over to the porch swing where we'd had so many important conversations over the years. But the short version is that my boss tried to steal my work and give it to his son, so I told him exactly what he could do with that idea. I walked her through the whole mess: Gerald's ultimatum, Sierra's betrayal, the resignation video, and finally the Redsky acquisition. I tried to explain it in terms she'd understand, focusing more on the principle of the thing than the technical details. When I got to the part about the $50 million, she was quiet for a long moment, just staring at me like I'd told her I'd been elected president. $50 million, she repeated slowly, like she was testing how the words sounded. Adrian, that's more money than I can even picture. I know, I said. It doesn't feel real yet. She reached over and took my hand, her fingers small and warm and slightly rough from decades of hard work. You know what your grandfather would say if he were here? What's that? He'd say they only saw you as a tool, not as a person. But now they're going to see what they lost when they tried to use you instead of respect you. That hit me harder than I'd expected. Grandpa Robert had died when I was 16, but I could still hear his voice sometimes, usually when I was facing some kind of difficult decision. He'd been a mechanic his whole life, the kind of man who believed that if you did good work, you deserved good pay, and if someone tried to cheat you, you had every right to find a better deal somewhere else. I brought you something, Grandma said, getting up and disappearing into the house for a few minutes. When she came back, she was carrying an envelope that looked like it had been sitting in a drawer for years. What's this? I asked, turning it over in my hands. Your grandfather would be proud of what you've accomplished, she said, settling back down on the swing. He always said you had something special, that you were going to do big things someday. Before he passed, he made me promise to give this to you when you really needed it. I opened the envelope carefully, half expecting to find some kind of sentimental letter or maybe an old photo. Instead, I found a property deed. The address was familiar. It was the old warehouse district downtown, a building I'd driven past 1,000 times without really thinking about it. Grandpa bought that place back in 1987, she explained. It was just a small warehouse then, nothing fancy. He had this crazy idea about starting his own garage, being his own boss instead of working for someone else. Never got the chance to do anything with it before he got sick, but he held on to it anyway. Said someday it might be useful for something. I stared at the deed, my hands trembling slightly. The warehouse was in the perfect location, close enough to downtown to be convenient, but far enough out to be affordable. It was exactly the kind of space someone might use to start their own company, to build something from the ground up without having to answer to anyone else. There's something else, Grandma said, pulling a key out of her cardigan pocket. I went by there last month to check on the place. It needs some work, but the bones are still good. Just like this house. I took the key, and for the first time since this whole nightmare started, I felt like I could see the future clearly. Not just what I was running from, but what I was running toward. A week after visiting Grandma Miriam, I was standing in the middle of my grandfather's old warehouse, watching a TechFront weekly camera crew set up their equipment and thinking about how perfectly poetic this whole situation had become. The space was exactly what I'd hoped it would be: high ceilings, exposed brick walls, and these massive windows that let in streams of late afternoon sunlight. It needed work, sure, but it had character. It felt like the kind of place where real innovation happened, not the sterile corporate bullshit I'd left behind at Dratech. Marcus Rodriguez, the host of TechFront Weekly, was one of those guys who'd built his reputation on getting the real story behind the tech world's biggest scandals. He'd broken the news about the Theranos fraud 2 years before anyone else picked it up, and his interview style was legendary for making CEOs squirm in their designer chairs. When his producer called asking for an exclusive interview about the Dratech situation, I knew exactly where I wanted to film it. This is perfect, Marcus said, adjusting his wireless mic as the lighting crew worked on getting the angles just right. The whole startup in a garage vibe really drives home the David versus Goliath angle we're going for. The warehouse definitely had that scrappy underdog feel to it. I'd spent the past few days cleaning it up, moving out some of the old mechanical equipment that had been gathering dust for decades. There was still plenty of work to do. The electrical system needed updating, the heating was basically non-existent, and don't even get me started on the plumbing, but it was mine. 100%, no strings attached, debt-free mine. I'd set up a small workspace in one corner with my laptop, a whiteboard, and some of the prototyping equipment I'd rescued from my home office before Sierra could claim it as community property. The contrast was striking. Here I was, building the next phase of my career in this raw, honest space, while Gerald Barrett was probably sitting in his mahogany-paneled office, trying to figure out how to spin this PR nightmare. "All right, Adrian," Marcus said, settling into the folding chair across from mine. "Let's start with the basics. Walk me through what happened at Draytech from your perspective." The cameras started rolling, and I told the story again. Gerald's ultimatum, the patent transfer document, Sierra's complicity, the whole twisted family scheme to steal my intellectual property and hand it over to Jace like some kind of participation trophy. But this time, I had visual aids. I'd brought printouts of the code, timeline documentation, even a laptop set up to demonstrate how the algorithm actually worked. Marcus was good at his job. He asked the right follow-up questions, pushed for specifics when I was being too diplomatic, and generally guided the conversation in a way that would make for compelling television. We talked about the broader implications of corporate IP theft, the challenges facing independent developers, and what my experience might mean for other innovators dealing with similar situations. "So what's next for you?" Marcus asked, glancing around the warehouse. "Are you planning to start your own company?" "That's the plan," I said, and just saying it out loud made it feel more real. This space is going to be the headquarters for my next venture. I want to build something that actually values innovation and the people who create it. That's when everything went sideways. I heard the side door slam open, followed by the sound of multiple sets of footsteps echoing through the warehouse. Marcus and I both turned to see Gerald Barrett striding across the concrete floor like he owned the place, with Sierra and Jace trailing behind him like reluctant backup dancers. Gerald was wearing his most expensive suit, the charcoal Armani he usually saved for board meetings, and his face was the color of overripe tomatoes. "Cut the cameras," Gerald barked at the crew, pointing at them like he was issuing military orders. "This interview is over." Marcus looked at me with raised eyebrows, clearly wondering how I wanted to handle this unexpected development. I nodded toward the cameras. "Keep rolling," I said calmly. "This should be interesting." "Mr. Barrett," Marcus said, his journalist instincts kicking in immediately. "Marcus Rodriguez from TechFront Weekly. Would you like to comment on the allegations Mr. Clark has made about Draytech Industries?" Gerald ignored him completely, focusing all his rage on me. "Adrian, you have no idea what you've done to this company. Our stock price has dropped 12% since your little stunt went viral. The board is asking questions I can't answer. Maybe you should have thought about that before you try to steal my work," I replied, staying seated while he loomed over me like some kind of corporate supervillain. "Your work?" Jace finally spoke up, his voice cracking slightly with indignation. "Dude, you used company resources, company time, company computers. That makes it company property." I had to bite back a laugh. "Jace, buddy, I've got security footage of me working on this project in my home office at 2 in the morning using my own laptop. I've got receipts for every piece of hardware I bought with my own money. I've got documentation showing that you couldn't even explain the basic algorithm logic when I tried to walk you through it 6 months ago." "He's lying," Jace said, looking directly at the camera crew. "He's just bitter because he didn't get the promotion he thought he deserved." Marcus was eating this up, I could tell. This was the kind of unscripted drama that made for viral television content. "Mr. Barrett," he said, addressing Gerald, "do you have any documentation to support your claim that this algorithm was developed using company resources?" Gerald's jaw tightened. "This is a private family matter that's been blown completely out of proportion by a disgruntled employee with a vendetta." "Family matter?" I stood up now, feeling my own anger starting to rise. "You tried to force me to sign over my intellectual property to your son, who can't code his way out of a paper bag. How exactly is that a family matter?" "You married into this family," Sierra said, speaking for the first time since they'd walked in. "That means we support each other. That means you helped Jace succeed." The audacity of that statement hit me like a physical blow. Support each other? Where was that support when your father was tearing up my promotion letter? Where was that support when you all decided to steal 5 years of my work? The cameras kept rolling, capturing every word, every expression, every moment of this train wreck playing out in real time. And for the first time since this whole mess started, I felt like I was winning. The TechFront Weekly episode aired 3 days later, and let me tell you, it was like watching a nuclear bomb go off in slow motion. I streamed it live from my hotel room in Palo Alto, sitting on the edge of the bed with my laptop balanced on my knees and a bowl of takeout Chinese getting cold on the nightstand. The show's producers had done an incredible job editing the footage. They'd managed to capture every cringeworthy moment of Gerald's meltdown, every entitled whine from Jace, and every tone-deaf comment from Sierra. But the real magic happened in post-production. Marcus and his team had fact-checked every single claim made during that warehouse confrontation, and they presented their findings with the kind of methodical precision that would make a forensic accountant weep with joy. When Jace claimed I'd used company resources, they cut to documentation showing I'd purchased all my development hardware with personal credit cards. When Gerald insisted the algorithm was company property, they displayed the timestamps proving I'd been working on it for months before ever bringing it to Draytech. The cherry on top was when they played the security footage from my home office, grainy black and white video of me hunched over my laptop at 3 in the morning, surrounded by empty energy drink cans and technical manuals I'd bought with my own money. The timestamp clearly showed this was 8 months before I'd ever mentioned the project to anyone at work. My phone started buzzing about halfway through the broadcast. Text messages, missed calls, social media notifications, the digital equivalent of a standing ovation. I'd turned off most of my notifications after the Redsky announcement, but a few were still getting through, and every single one was some variation of "holy shit, dude, you destroyed them." The best part came near the end of the episode, when Marcus did this beautiful piece-to-camera segment, standing in front of Draytech's corporate headquarters. "The question facing Draytech Industries tonight," he said, looking directly into the camera with that serious journalist expression that meant business, "is whether a company can maintain credibility when its leadership has been caught on camera attempting to steal intellectual property from their own employees." I closed the laptop and lay back on the hotel bed, staring at the ceiling and trying to process what had just happened. In the span of 45 minutes of television, my entire story had been validated in front of millions of viewers. Every lie Gerald had told, every excuse Jace had made, every rationalization Sierra had offered, all of it had been systematically dismantled by a team of professional fact-checkers. My phone rang, and Mateo's name popped up on the screen. I'd been expecting this call. "Bro," he said, and I could hear the grin in his voice. "I just watched you become the most famous whistleblower in tech history. How does it feel to be completely, utterly vindicated?" "Surreal," I admitted. "Like I'm watching someone else's life play out on television." "Check Twitter," he said. "You're trending worldwide. #DrayTechScandal is the #1 hashtag in the United States right now." I opened my laptop again and pulled up Twitter, and holy shit, he wasn't kidding. The platform had basically turned into a 24-hour Adrian Clark Appreciation Society. People were sharing the video clip of Jace claiming he understood the algorithm, followed immediately by footage of him admitting 6 months earlier that he didn't really get the math behind it. Someone had made a side-by-side comparison of Gerald tearing up my promotion letter versus him claiming this was all just a family misunderstanding. But the responses that hit me the hardest were from other developers sharing their own stories of corporate IP theft, nepotism, and workplace exploitation. Hundreds of programmers, engineers, and innovators who'd been screwed over by companies that saw them as disposable resources rather than human beings with rights and dignity. Watching Adrian Clark stand up to Draytech gave me the courage to report my own boss for stealing my code, wrote one developer from Seattle. "Been dealing with similar BS at my company for 2 years. Filing a complaint with HR tomorrow morning," posted another. To every executive watching this, "Your employees are people, not tools. Treat them accordingly," read a tweet that had been retweeted over 15,000 times. I was scrolling through the responses when my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. When I opened it, I saw a link to a breaking news article from TechCrunch. Draytech board launches emergency investigation following viral scandal. The article was brutal. According to their sources inside the company, The board of directors had held an emergency meeting that afternoon to discuss Gerald's conduct and the company's liability exposure. 3 major clients had already called to express concerns about doing business with a company whose leadership was caught on camera attempting to commit intellectual property theft. But the real kicker came at the end of the article. Sources close to the situation report that CEO Gerald Barrett has been placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the investigation. I had to read that sentence 3 times before it sank in. Gerald Barrett, the man who tried to steal my life's work and hand it over to his incompetent son, had been benched by his own board of directors. The same people who'd enabled his bullshit for years had finally realized that protecting him was going to cost them more than firing him. My phone rang again, and this time it was a number I definitely recognized. Sierra. I stared at the screen for a long moment, debating whether to answer. Part of me was curious about what she could possibly have to say after everything that had happened. Part of me just wanted to let it go to voicemail and move on with my life. I answered on the 4th ring. What do you want, Sierra? Adrian, please, she said, and her voice sounded different, smaller, more desperate than I'd ever heard it. We need to talk. This whole thing has gotten completely out of hand. I was just trying to protect Jace, trying to help my family. I never meant for any of this to happen. Protect Jace from what? I asked. From having to earn his own success? From facing the consequences of his own incompetence? From failure, she said quietly. From becoming another trust fund kid who never amounts to anything. I thought if he had something solid to build on, something with your name attached to it, he could prove himself. The logic was so twisted it actually made my head hurt. So your solution was to steal my work and pretend he'd created it? I know how it sounds, she said. But you have to understand. No, I interrupted. I don't have to understand anything. You chose your family over your husband. You chose protecting Jace's feelings over respecting my work. You made your choice, and now you get to live with the consequences. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Sierra finally spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. The media is calling me an accomplice to corporate theft. My own colleagues won't talk to me. My father's career is over. Good, I said, and I meant it. Maybe now you'll understand what it feels like to have your life's work taken away from you. I hung up before she could respond and turned off my phone. Tomorrow, I'd start building something new. Tonight, I was going to enjoy watching the truth finally catch up with the Barrett family. 6 months later, I was standing in the renovated warehouse that had become Clark Code headquarters, watching Layla Ortiz present her clean water filtration prototype to a room full of potential investors. The transformation was incredible. What used to be my grandfather's dusty old storage space was now a state-of-the-art innovation lab, complete with 3D printers, testing equipment, and enough computing power to make NASA jealous. Layla was exactly the kind of person I'd started Clark Code to help. A single mother from East LA with a mechanical engineering degree she'd earned while working 2 jobs and raising her daughter. Her water filter design was brilliant, a compact, affordable system that could turn contaminated water into something safe to drink using nothing but solar power and some seriously clever chemistry. But every investor she'd approached had taken one look at her background and decided she wasn't worth the risk. Their loss was my gain. I'd given her a full development team, unlimited access to our prototyping lab, and most importantly, a contract that guaranteed she'd retain majority ownership of her invention. No corporate bullshit, no patent transfers, no family members swooping in to claim credit for her work. The system can process up to 50 gallons per day, Layla was saying, her confidence growing with each slide. Manufacturing cost per unit is under $200, but the impact on communities without clean water access is priceless. Redsky had funded our partnership enthusiastically, seeing Clark Code as a way to identify and nurture the next generation of breakthrough technologies. But this wasn't just about finding profitable innovations. It was about proving that you could build a successful company while actually treating people with respect and dignity. My phone buzzed with a news alert. Draytech Industries stock hits 3-year low following leadership scandal. I smiled and deleted the notification without reading the full article. Their problems weren't my problems anymore. Clark Code was becoming everything I dreamed of, a place where real innovation could flourish without corporate parasites trying to steal the credit. 1 year after that nightmare day in Gerald's office, I stood in my corner office on the top floor of Clark Code headquarters, looking out at the Denver skyline and thinking about how much had changed. The view was incredible. You could see the mountains in the distance, all snow-capped and majestic, like they were giving their approval to everything I'd built. On my wall, right next to my Stanford diploma, hung a framed copy of that torn promotion letter Gerald had ripped up. But this version was different. It had been reprinted on official Redsky letterhead and signed by Amira Bennett, with a handwritten note that said, "To the man who knew his value." She'd sent it to me on the 6-month anniversary of our deal, along with a bottle of champagne that probably cost more than my old monthly salary. The best part about success wasn't the money, though the money was pretty damn nice. It wasn't even the recognition or the industry awards Clark Code had started winning. The best part was watching people like Gerald, Sierra, and Jace try to rewrite history and failing miserably every single time. Sierra had given another interview last month, claiming she'd been the inspiration behind Adrian's innovative thinking. Gerald was making the rounds on business podcasts, spinning the whole thing as a family misunderstanding that got blown out of proportion by social media. And Jace. Poor Jace had tried to launch his own startup using code that looked suspiciously similar to my algorithm. Redsky's legal team had shut him down in exactly 1 week. My phone buzzed with a text from Mateo. Saw Jace's latest interview. Want me to clap back on Twitter? I typed back. Let them talk. The truth is louder. Success wasn't about proving them wrong anymore. It was about building something they couldn't touch, even if they tried. And I had.